Hello, and welcome to Apocalypse How, a podcast where we sit with the chaos and strive to be critical, curious, gentle, and a little bit silly. I'm your host, Heidi Ippolito, and today we're going to dive into the rabbit hole of the conspiratorial worldview known as QAnon. A quick little warning, we will be discussing child sexual abuse and exploitation a little bit as it pertains to the worldview of QAnon in this episode, as well as some intense depictions of people as demonic and evil. So getting into it, I'm sure by now many of you have heard of QAnon, but you may not know the full history and details of their beliefs. I first stumbled upon QAnon in early 2020, just before the COVID shutdown, and I continued to kind of casually keep an eye on it until around January 2021, when QAnon kind of exploded a little more into the mainstream and the public consciousness after that January 6th Capitol attack. Some of you might even remember Jacob Chansley, who was known as the QAnon shaman or the Q shaman, who ran around the Capitol building with a giant American flag as a cape, shirtless, covered in these kind of tribal tattoos, and wearing a fur-horned hat. He also led a prayer for his fellow rioters once they broke into the U.S. Senate chamber, making him a very compelling figure representing faith, violence, conspiratorial beliefs, and, in some sense, public performance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What exactly is QAnon? After researching QAnon for years for my dissertation work, essentially from 2020 to now, I can give you a brief overview. But it's truly impossible to condense everything there is to know about QAnon into a single podcast episode. So I'm sure we'll revisit some aspects of QAnon in future episodes. But for now, let's break it down and kind of go over the basics. QAnon began as a community of individuals, sometimes called Anons, who believe the world is controlled by a cabal of global elites who have power over various governments, mainstream media outlets, religious institutions, and the Hollywood entertainment industry. And this cabal uses their immense power to run secret sex trafficking rings and engage in the satanic ritual abuse of children in order to harvest their adrenochrome. That's a lot, but that's sort of the closest I can get to QAnon in a sentence. A quick side note about adrenochrome. It's a real chemical compound found in mammals produced by the oxidation of adrenaline. So hypothetically, you could get adrenochrome from a cow as much as you could get it from a person or a child. But this notion of quote unquote harvesting adrenochrome from children is based on a claim made in Hunter S. Thompson's 1971 book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which was made into a film in 1998 with Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro. And QAnon lore believes that the compound of adrenochrome can be taken as a drug, extracted by torturing young children to sort of heighten the level of adrenochrome in their blood. And that's usually done by what is called satanic ritual abuse. So it's a very specific imagining of how someone is sort of, it's not just, oh, I'm going to take a bath in the blood of children or virgins, which is also sort of a myth of elites of yore. But it goes further into this almost like scientific witchcraft, satanic quality. And I just wanted to put that out there as like, yes, adrenochrome is real, but the notion that there are people like ritualistically harvesting that is not proven in any capacity. But I'm going to keep going because there's a lot to cover with QAnon. Q is an anonymous online user who began posting cryptic messages, now referred to as Q drops. So each post is a Q drop, to 4chan and then later 8chan in November 2017. And this Q poster claims to have governmental Q clearance, as well as insider knowledge that Donald Trump is a heroic savior secretly working to end this evil cabal's global rule. And those who believe in QAnon yearn for what is called the Storm, which is a violent tribunal where everyone in the evil cabal will be arrested, imprisoned, publicly executed, etc. And after this giant retribution of the storm, this will usher in the Great Awakening, a more utopian era of peace and harmony where everyone, not just the Anons right now, but everyone will wake up or will have woken up to the QAnon reality. So there were nearly 5,000 of these posts, these Q drops, posted between 2017 and 2020. And they provide a kind of roadmap for analyzing the world through patterns and clues. The original drops authored by Q were posted on 4chan and 8chan, later called 8kun. These are message boards between October 2017 and December 2020. They've been archived by several sources, so you don't have to go to 4chan or 8chan to see these. You can find them on like random websites that have them all archived. And they can be understood as a kind of political communication or even a kind of almost religious scripture for Anons who work together to interpret all aspects of reality through the lens of the Q drops. The same way, again, you might interpret the world through biblical scripture. That's kind of a similar relationship. So who is this mysterious poster, Q? As I mentioned before, Q is named for a high level of governmental security clearance called Q clearance. Don't ask me what happens in Q clearance. I couldn't be bothered to find out. But all of this follows in the footsteps of other anonymous posters like FBI Anon who pose as or claim to be government insiders on message boards like 4chan and 8kun. And if you want to learn more about the alleged authors behind Q, I highly recommend Cullen Hobach's 2021 documentary series called Q Into the Storm. Again, it's on HBO. He does a great job of like a firsthand investigation into who authored all of these Q drops, which is very fascinating. But my personal research, it really led me to be less interested in the authors of Q, like the Q posts, and more interested in like the Anons, like what people do with these QAnon beliefs and how they've kind of leaked out of the little conspiratorial group of QAnon and have kind of become a little more mainstream. But you can look there if you are interested in, the origins of the Q posts. So there's not really been any new verified Q drops since 2020. That's a complicated issue, but basically there was just a period of time with the Q drops and they're sort of done after 2020. And the cryptic posts continue to be this big guide for the beliefs and phrases and overall narrative of QAnon. I still see screenshots of Q posts under Donald Trump's like Truth Social posts. If I scroll down to the comments, there's almost always memes that reference QAnon as well as like actual Q drops that are screenshotted as like proof of some kind of argument. So it's out there. It's certainly not as popular as it was a few years ago. But getting back to the Q drops themselves, the vague and cryptic nature of the way the Q drops are written allows for all kinds of interpretations. And this is a practice in QAnon known as baking. Anons are considered bakers who use clues from the drops, which are referred to as crumbs, to bake a narrative out of these various ingredients of clues. I'm aware that metaphor doesn't really work. I'm just repeating the kind of metaphor they like to use. QAnon is also known as, or sometimes referred to as, an umbrella conspiracy, which allows other older or fringe ideas to be folded into the QAnon worldview. So if you see a crumb from an alien conspiracy over here, you can fold it in with a crumb of a JFK assassination conspiracy over there and bake them all together into a big QAnon apple pie. And many people will sometimes call QAnon a cult, just like the way sometimes people call MAGA a cult. But I don't know if that's the most helpful term. I think it's a little reductive and kind of ignores the importance of like the both up and down and side to side relationships, right? Like structurally, it's decentralized. So there's not like a strict hierarchical up and down hierarchy. There are some up and down relationships, but there's also a lot of horizontal relationships as well. So what I mean by that is there's Q distributing the drops at the top, and there's Trump seen as the leader, also at the top. And then there's popular bakers who become kind of QAnon influencers. So they're sort of intermediaries translating what Trump is saying, what the Q drops are saying. And then there's all the other Anons who take all this information from Q, from the influencers, from Trump, and do their own baking, quote unquote, at the bottom. But it's not strictly hierarchical in that sense. So Q and Trump are seen as leaders, and, you know, there's some theories in QAnon that Trump and Q are actually the same person. But Anons are still free to interpret Q drops any way they like. It's a little like the way you go to church and there's a pastor that helps you interpret scripture, but you still have the freedom to read scripture directly. But there's also people who know how to translate Greek and Hebrew, which is a little different than reading scripture in English, let's say. So it's kind of like spiritual or theological interpretation, but it's not really grounded in any strictly agreed upon theology. So QAnon has a lot of random like beliefs and conjectures and predictions, but there's not like a manual or a book or a list of tenets that's like, this is exactly what we believe and this is exactly what we don't believe. So ultimately, these individual conspiracies and overarching narratives that emerge from the Q drops are interpreted and promoted by these influencers, these other Anons, and from there, the ideas spread across the internet, and then you might get, you know, some random conspiracy that pops up. Like, I'm sure some of you remember the Wayfair conspiracy, where there was this idea that there are furniture items labeled as the names of usually young women who have gone missing, and they're priced at like thousands of dollars. And again, there are plenty of other like reporters and podcasts and people who have debunked this, so you can look those up. But that is something that kind of like derives from the world of QAnon and Pizzagate. And as another little aside, Pizzagate was a conspiracy that arose in 2016, kind of coming out of the Hillary Clinton's email scandal. So people were interpreting parts of the Clinton emails whenever there's a discussion about pizza. It was assumed that that was a specific reference to child trafficking, like the selling and purchasing and abuse of children. And it was supposed that that was happening in Comet Ping Pong, which is owned by one of Hillary Clinton's colleagues, John Podesta. And then there's weird artwork in the pizzeria. And then there was a man who was influenced by these conspiracies, showed up to Comet Ping Pong with a gun and wanted to rescue the children from the basement. But there was no basement and there was no child trafficking ring because it was a conspiracy based on an interpretation of emails that was often discussing pizza. Because, in my opinion, you order pizza for a lot of people when you have late night meetings, and I assume that's what politicians do. Again, I'm not saying I love Hillary Clinton or John Podesta or whatever. I'm just saying I don't think that they are secretly doing a child trafficking ring in a pizzeria. That's important because Pizzagate is almost like a test case for QAnon. It happened before QAnon, but all of the aspects of Pizzagate later show up in QAnon, which ends up referencing Pizzagate as well. So now, years later, the online community of QAnon has coalesced into a belief system that essentially bows to the divine authority of a Christian God. So there's tons of references to Bible verses and things, and we'll get to that later. So there's a divine authority of a Christian God who's working directly through Trump. And this whole worldview professes a belief in the ultimate triumph of good over evil and uses various online platforms to maintain these sacred texts, these posts, and these rituals of posting memes and a kind of doctrine of not really trusting anyone in power except Trump or those who align with him. And I've personally scraped all the memes we're going to talk about today from Truth Social, Telegram, Twitter, but you can see them all over the place. I've seen them on Gab, Parler, random personal blogs. For a while, a lot of mainstream platforms like Instagram and TikTok and Facebook banned a lot of references to QAnon. Honestly, I haven't been on Facebook in a decade, and I haven't been on Instagram since November. So I'm not sure how frequently it pops up. But we'll get to QAnon in the present. For now, we're going back to QAnon as it started and kind of what it originally was. So ultimately, QAnon perpetuates specific conspiratorial beliefs that are mostly untrue. Like, I want to be clear when I say, like, I don't think that there's a secret cabal of pedophilic elites controlling every aspect of the world. But these conspiratorial beliefs are rooted in larger ideas that are true. So at some point, we will talk about the Epstein files. Not right now. That's way too much to bite off today. But there are people in power who do things that are wildly immoral, illegal, and they often get away with it outside of the judicial system, which is wildly frustrating. And so I do agree that there are people in elite positions of power who are involved in the abuse of young women, young men, boys, girls, and the whole Epstein debacle is definitely proof of that. But I don't know if it's proof, for example, that everyone in the government is involved in that, or everyone in Hollywood is involved in that, or everyone in the Catholic Church. And that's what QAnon is pitching, that like everyone is part of the conspiracy. And so that's where I kind of want to slow down and say, yes, there are points to QAnon that make you feel like, yeah, you know, I get that. That feels like it could be true. But we got to slow down and really look at like the whole big picture worldview that they're kind of postulating, right? That they're, I wouldn't say pushing, because that sounds like its own conspiracy. I just mean the beliefs they profess to believe in are a lot bigger than just rich people are doing stuff I don't like, because I would agree with that. But let's move on. One thing I thought might be helpful in terms of thinking about QAnon is, how is it like other conspiracies and how is it different from other kind of established conspiracies? So what will help is defining conspiracies. So Michael Barkun is a scholar who works in religion and conspiracy, and his work is super helpful here. He defines a conspiracist worldview as implying a universe governed by design rather than randomness, which can be defined by three distinct features. Nothing happens by accident, nothing is as it seems, and everything is connected. So ultimately, this is a worldview that like nothing is random, it's all connected, it's not by accident, and you can't really trust it. Nothing is as it seems. Like, you have to look a little closer to know what's really going on. Conspiracies also tend to have a Manichaean view of the world. That just means that there's a constant battle between good and evil. That's what the term Manichaean view means. So everything is like black and white, good and evil, hero and villain. And when you understand conspiracies this way, you can see how there's just very little room for gray areas or nuance. If everything is good and evil, connected, designed, not as it seems, then what? There's no room for disagreement, for doubt, for diversity of thought, and dare I say, freedom of speech. But we'll get into that a little more later. Michael Barkun also categorizes three types of conspiracy beliefs: event, systemic, and super. So event conspiracies are ones that revolve around like a discrete event or set of events, like 9/11 or political assassinations, which I'm sure you're familiar with, conspiracies about 9/11 or about the JFK assassination. And the second one is systemic conspiracies, which is that, as Barkun defines, a single evil organization that implements a plan to infiltrate and subvert existing institutions. So that's kind of what I was talking about before, like Hollywood, the Catholic Church, the U.S. government. An evil organization is infiltrating those established institutions and like subverting them and using them for evil. And then a super conspiracy involves multiple conspiracies that are believed to be linked together hierarchically. And that's how we get something like QAnon, right? So you have these institutions that are being subverted by a cabal. You have these specific events that are happening that the cabal is controlling. And then really there's just like a whole bunch of other stuff that gets thrown in there. And that's why calling QAnon a super conspiracy or an umbrella conspiracy is sort of a useful term. So they include all sorts of stuff, right? Like the adrenochrome thing is basically like a recycled version of medieval anti-Semitic blood libel conspiracies. So if this is new to you, blood libel is this idea that it falsely accuses Jews of murdering Christians in order to use their blood in the performance of religious rituals, like baking matzah bread or reenacting the crucifixion, which is extremely untrue. It is not true, but it's a very common anti-Semitic conspiracy that pops up again and again, that like Jewish people are evil and they specifically do like violent things to Christians for like weird rituals that frankly don't make any sense. So that's a big one that a lot of people point to in the research of QAnon, is like, oh, we've seen this before. Really, we've seen it for thousands of years. Another one that gets kind of tossed in with QAnon is UFO, like disclosure conspiracies. So disclosure just means that the government is secretly hiding information about aliens and UFOs, and disclosure is when they sort of strategically disclose information to the public. I mean, funny enough, Steven Spielberg has a movie called Disclosure Day coming out this year. Can't wait to see it. Maybe we'll do a special episode breaking it down. Would be fun. And, you know, there have been a lot of UFO, like government videos and sightings that have like kind of come out since 2017. And to be clear, like, you can be a UFO conspiracist or like even a UFO enthusiast and not necessarily be a QAnon believer. But someone who believes in QAnon is probably pretty likely to also believe in some like alien conspiracy stuff. Again, assassination conspiracies, especially the Kennedys, are a huge one in QAnon. There's a belief that JFK Jr. is still alive and will return as Trump's running mate. I mean, this belief was circa, you know, before his second term and before his second and third run, if that makes sense. Funny enough, there are Q drops that directly refute this, but there are also like tons of memes and comments and people who believe this to be true. There was even a fringe group led by this man who called himself Negative 48, who's a numerologist, who led a group of Anons to Dealey Plaza in Dallas in 2021 to await JFK Jr.'s return, which obviously didn't happen. The whole thing is honestly really tragic. Numerology is just like correlating letters and numbers and like adding up the numeric value of letters to kind of create meaning. And Negative 48, I'm so sorry, I forget the man's name, but he did die, I think, in a motorcycle accident. So there are infinite branches of random QAnon leaders and influencers. There's Romana Didelot in Canada, who calls herself the Queen of Canada, and the people who follow her stop like paying their utility bills to the government in protest. So there's just a lot of random little pockets of QAnon stuff. And this, sometimes they kind of branch off and are sort of doing their own thing in a way, which again just shows you how under this umbrella, there's a lot of freedom and flexibility. Another really key aspect of QAnon belief is this idea of like clones, lizard people, what they call transvestigations, all of which are kind of rooted in the idea that you can deduce all sorts of things just from pictures that you see online, especially pictures of strangers or like public figures. So it's like, oh, that's not Joe Biden, that's a clone. That's not Hillary Clinton, that's a lizard person. That's not a man, that's a woman. That's not a woman, that's a man. And, you know, to be honest, I don't think this is something just QAnon does. I think we're all in a little bit of danger of feeling like we know things just because we've seen an image or a video out of context. And I'm not here to say you shouldn't believe what you can see and hear with your own eyes and ears. I just mean on the internet, it's really easy for context to be slippery. And I just think it's really important that we slow down and find context for things rather than just like drawing circles and lines around like weird images that can be a little distorted that make us think things like oh, Biden's ears look weird, so he's a clone. I'm like, okay, guys. We don't have any proof that like the clones exist at all. We do have a lot of vivid imagination of these things from movies, but we'll get to that in a moment. A group that's not typically included in QAnon is flat earthers. Somehow this is like a bridge too far for them. And generally, while flat earth conspiracies are dismissed and kind of laughed at, even in QAnon, I've still seen flat earth memes and diagrams and arguments in QAnon spaces online. So again, there's no central place where QAnon can be like clearly defined or even refuted, like a church, right? Like, oh, here's our doctrine and this is everything we believe, because there's not a single leader. And the author or authors of Q are unknown and silent, and ultimately they don't really matter as much because people have run with the ideas more than the leaders. If anything, Trump is the leader, and he's not a person who came up with this himself. He's someone who's embraced it. I'm sure you remember there was a public debate a while back, a town hall on TV where he was asked what he thinks of QAnon, and I believe he responded something along the lines of, well, they support me and they seem like good people, which, you know, it's just his general answer that, like, if someone supports me, I like them, which I think can be a dangerous, slippery slope. I don't think you should just accept everyone who supports your cause, because you could have all kinds of cruel and dangerous people who support things that you do. But, you know, that's a story for another day. There are those who argue that QAnon does behave like a religion or like a church. There's a great article by Marc-Andre Argentino where he does attend a QAnon online church around the COVID years. And you know, that's another like really fun, kind of interesting aspect to explore. But ultimately, we're going to keep going. So if those are the aspects that make it kind of a classic conspiracy in a lot of ways, what makes QAnon different, right? Like, why have we even heard of QAnon when maybe before there's a bunch of conspiracies you might not ever have heard of, right? Like, how did this get so popular? I think something that makes it different from other conspiracies are speed, proximity, flexibility, faith, and fun. The speed and proximity is very much due to technological changes. So before the dawn of our algorithmically driven social media internet, you used to have to like wait for pamphlets to arrive in the mail and attend conventions in person and chat with people in small online message boards that had like 17 people on them and they wouldn't respond for like several days. Now you can just take your phone out of your pocket, go on any social media or website on your phone and find someone who will verify just about any wacky belief you can come up with, right? We just have access to more information quicker. Another thing that makes QAnon unique is its flexibility. So as I've kind of hinted at, it kind of changes when it needs to. So initially, QAnon was all about sort of the origins of Pizzagate, and Hillary Clinton is going to be arrested, and the whole lock her up chance, and she's secretly wearing an ankle monitor. You can see it in the photos of her pantsuits. And any day now we're going to arrest Hillary Clinton, and Trump is going to reveal that there's an evil cabal and all will be well in the world. Well, in the wake of COVID, QAnon took like a drastic, like anti-vax, anti-science stance at times that like clashed with Trump himself. So Trump, you know, started off saying COVID wasn't a big deal, it was going to go away, and then he ended up taking credit for Operation Warp Speed and you know, directly advocated that people take the vaccine, much to the chagrin of a lot of Anons. You know, there were very angry QAnon believers who were like, wait a minute, like the vaccines are evil. How could he say that? That doesn't make sense. But I think it also just demonstrates how QAnon can hold multiple truths at once, right? Sometimes this is called cognitive dissonance. You can sort of like emotionally believe one big thing, but like all the little facts don't always like match or line up. You know, for example, QAnon believes that Trump is always working for the good of the people, but they also don't trust like vaccine science or the COVID vaccine, which was directly promoted by Trump. It's like, was the vaccine an evil, you know, choice from the cabal, or was it promoted by Trump, or was it both? How does that work? That's part of, how QAnon is flexible. If you try to pin anything down too directly, it just gets a little slippery. So that's where we get to this notion of faith, right? So we have speed and proximity, we have flexibility, and then we have the concept of faith. So according to our favorite conspiracy scholar, Michael Barkun, no matter how much evidence their adherents accumulate, belief in conspiracy theory ultimately becomes a matter of faith rather than proof. So in other words, he's saying that QAnon is able to depict an all-powerful cabal that's at the one hand super secretive, but also like very public, because ultimately these ideas are non-falsifiable. They're really difficult to disprove because to a certain degree they're rooted in faith, they're rooted in emotion. And I don't mean that is like a negative thing. I don't mean that as like a diss. I think that's a very human thing. I believe in stuff that's really hard to prove as well, right? Like I have hope that humanity will progress toward like a kinder, more just and more fair world. That's hard to prove. And I'm not trying to. I'm just declaring something that I believe to be true. And I can point to all kinds of anecdotes that show how people are less violent and they're more kind toward one another. And you could also pull out a bunch of statistics that show how cruel and violent people are to each other, right? So I'm just saying it's a very human thing. And part of my whole purpose of talking about QAnon is not to point and laugh and say, these idiots, haha, how could they believe that? But like, oh yeah, I also do a version of this. And how can we remain humble and kind and curious toward worldviews that are really baffling? Because ultimately, I would hope someone grants me the same kind of grace, right? Like, ugh, how could Heidi believe that? But maybe if someone slows down and asks questions, we could have an interesting conversation. But moving on, what makes QAnon so compelling? So we know what makes it like a little bit different. And part of what makes it different is that it's obviously interesting. So it's fun. There's a grain of truth to these things. We're going to get into that. So if there's a grain of truth at the center of most conspiracies, it makes sense that people kind of fall down a rabbit hole that go beyond that nugget of truth, right? Who really killed JFK? Do aliens exist? Have they made contact with humanity? What secrets is the government hiding? These questions can lead to what's called stigmatized knowledge, which just means the kind of stuff that's seen as taboo or dismissed or goes against the grain of like agreed upon facts, which means conspiracies are not irrational. I think this is a really tricky one. I think it's easy for us to go, these people are irrational and illogical. But a lot of theorists, including Michael Barkun, argue that conspiracy literature often mimics conventional scholarship, especially in how like sources are cited and how they present evidence. I mean, if you look at like a conspiracy diagram, they resemble scientific posters, presenting facts and linking how arguments are connected to each other in like a similar structural way. So it's often unhelpful to say that conspiracies are just nonsense because they do make sense. It's just more about asking whose expertise matters and how expertise is defined, right? So it's more like, what kind of worldview does this make sense within? Which is also kind of a hard thing to wrap our minds around. But it also helps if you understand QAnon as relying on populist expertise based on this kind of stigmatized knowledge. So what that means is like populist expertise is like, instead of I trust vaccine science because the people who are experts in vaccines have a lot of proof and a lot of agreed upon knowledge, like as a collective group of experts, that vaccines are safe. Populist expertise would look to like anecdotal stories from people who are not vaccine scientists. And I want to be clear, I'm not trying to make an argument that people who have negative experiences with vaccines are like stupid or shouldn't be listened to. I'm just giving like a easy example of how there's like a field of experts, and then there's like how everyday people experience things, and they don't always line up, which again, that's okay. Like, I think that's normal. I think we just have to figure out what kind of relationships we want with experts and what kind of relationships we want with anecdotes, because I actually think both are really helpful. But in the case of QAnon, there is more trust in the populist expertise or the kind of populist anecdotes than there are in kind of experts within the field. So all of this is to sort of avoid the misunderstanding of conspiracy theories as quote unquote illogical. Rather, they are logical within their own framework of reality. So now the concern is whether or not we share the same experience of reality, which that's kind of a philosophical question, right? So it's not really like, oh, someone who believes in QAnon is not logical or rational enough for me to engage with. Instead, it kind of challenges, at least it challenges me into humility, asking me to be curious about how another person sees the world. Because of saying like, well, that's just not true, you're being stupid. Like, that's not just not going to get you anywhere. Instead, it's like, oh, you firmly believe the world is controlled by elites who are harvesting the blood of children for recreational drug use. That's a really big belief. I don't hold that belief, so I'm going to have to like meet you in a different place and like find some common ground somewhere else, and then maybe come back to that talking point later. But let's get back to QAnon. So another thing that makes QAnon really compelling, besides like the fact that it's rooted in some truth and it's not necessarily irrational, is this aspect of participatory culture and meme warfare. So starting with participatory culture, media studies scholar Henry Jenkins, he first started talking about this concept in the 90s. And he was noticing how a lot of fandoms are not just like top down, but bottom up, kind of like what we were talking about with the hierarchy of QAnon before. So in other words, like for the longest time, cultural studies used to see popular culture or like mass culture as mindless, right? Like the masses consume what they want you to consume kind of thing, right? And then you have scholars like Stuart Hall and again, Henry Jenkins, who remind us that people, like even consumers, we have more agency than that. We're not all just like blindly buying one brand of peanut butter, you know, or we're not all watching the same show. And it's not really like a black and white issue. Like I would say, yes, there are a lot of corporate studios who put a ton of money in like Marvel movies, and then a lot of people go see Marvel movies. But recently there was this horror film called Backrooms that I saw this weekend. I loved it. And that was from I think he was like 18 at the time when he made a YouTube series. And then just this month, he's turning 21. He's the youngest director to have a film hit #1 in the box office, which is wild. And that was all from kind of a grassroots YouTube series that got picked up by the distribution studio A24. And then, of course, you know, they did their own marketing and thing, but like, that's not a Marvel movie with, you know, millions and millions of dollars behind it. It was a lot smaller. And so it just shows that, like, yes, there is corporate influence in the world, but there's also like grassroots interest in things, and virality is one of those, right? Like you can't force something to go viral. So all of this is just showing that participatory culture is this larger term for how people interact with culture on a sort of individual and even community level. And it's not just top down. It's not just these people in power tell you which art is good and which art is bad. There are still those people, but that doesn't mean everyone adheres to that. People have a lot more agency than that. So in this way, we can understand QAnon as a sort of participatory culture, right? It's what Matthew Hanna calls crowdsourced conspiracy theory with what Barkun calls improvisational style. So it's crowdsourced. There's a bunch of different people kind of contributing to the interpretation of QAnon in an almost improvised way, right? Like one thing builds on another, rather than, you know, there is a set of Q drops, but they're sort of like a living text that are constantly interpreted. And it's interpreted about like something that's happening right now, right? It's not 2,000 years old. So another way to think about it is like decentralized storytelling done by amateur researchers who weave narratives together like fan fiction, kind of crowdsourcing a story. And we'll return to the topic of fandom and fan fiction in just a little bit. But first, We're going to talk about meme warfare. What is that? Many of the Q drops directly encourage Anons to participate in meme warfare, which just means creating and disseminating memes across the internet as part of a digital and spiritual battle, which allows people to participate in this very violent and masculine practice of war without ever leaving your couch or, getting injured in any physical way. It honestly, it reminds me of virtual protest participation, if I'm going to call it that. And this happens across the political spectrum, right? In online spaces. So, we find ourselves reposting the same Instagram post or, posting a very declarative political statement instead of actually attending a protest or volunteering with a local mutual aid group. To be clear, I am also very guilty of doing this. I try to get involved as much as I can, but honestly, a lot of us are busy and tired or have other concerns about going to protests, or we don't have time to volunteer. And I think that's a pretty human experience. But the ability to post those things online gives you this emotional outlet that makes you feel like you've participated. And I think the QAnon meme warfare does a similar thing, right? It makes you feel like you're part of this big war, but you don't actually have to physically interact with anyone. It also reminds me a bit of those raising awareness campaigns that really took off in the 2010s. Things like let's raise awareness. I mean, obviously raise awareness for cancer and raise awareness for child trafficking and human trafficking, or raise awareness for example, if anyone's heard of the group Invisible Children. I was very involved as a youth in this group. I was in a music video for Invisible Children, fun fact. And in my opinion, the heart behind that can be really great. There's nothing wrong with it. But a lot of times these things stop at awareness and don't go further. You become less interested in changing policy or, using money to make change beyond marketing. And I think that's where the internet makes that worse, because there's just more space for awareness and less space for tactical, physical action. So all this is to say is we're living in a new frontier of internet participation, right? This kind of participatory culture and meme warfare, this kind of posting online can make you feel the same as when you actually participate in something local, right? Posting memes makes you really feel like you're doing something for the QAnon movement. So I think that's another aspect of why QAnon took off the way it did, is it gave someone an avenue to do something, especially during COVID when we were all going a little cuckoo inside doing nothing. So it's understandable. So now I want to pivot from kind of the general beliefs of QAnon, how it sort of fits into the world of conspiracies, how it's sort of different, how it's sort of same, how it's very compelling. And I want to move to the influences. So I think fandom and religion are two of the biggest QAnon influences, influences on QAnon. There's also a lot of political and military language in QAnon, which is a whole other beast that I don't have as much expertise in. And I think that's absolutely another avenue of conversation. But I'm going to just focus in on fandom and religion. And I'll start with a quote from one of the characters in Stephen King's short story, The Body, which was later adapted as a movie called Stand By Me. And this quote is, "The only two useful art forms are religion and stories." And, just on a personal note, my academic research has been focused on religion and storytelling for, I don't know, over a decade now, 15 plus years. And I'm just so deeply drawn to belief and storytelling, especially when we tell those stories on screen, right, with movies and TV. And I think there's just something very powerful at the intersection of those things. And I think QAnon finds itself at that intersection. So with fandom, with sort of on-screen storytelling, we're talking about things like fan fiction, pop culture, narratives, on-screen stories. And The Matrix is a key example of this. It's one of the main reasons I ended up researching QAnon, is because I said, whoa, why are there so many memes referencing the Matrix, right? They're talking about red pilling, waking up from the Matrix, this heroic chosen one savior character, Neo. And the franchise is famously interpreted in all kinds of ways. The Matrix movies are seen as a religious allegory, often for Buddhism and Christianity. It's a metaphor for the director's journey into accepting their trans identities. The Wachowski sisters were formerly the Wachowski brothers when the films came out, and through their own journey of understanding their being as trans women, they realized how much the Matrix was part of that journey, even subconsciously to a degree. But the Matrix is also like where we find a signature catchphrase for the online far-right incel community, right? Red pill, blue pill, and there's also a black pill, right? You take the red pill and that wakes you up to reality. You take the blue pill, you stay in a false but very comforting reality. Or you can take the black pill, which is essentially nihilism. You know what's going on, but you don't have any will to fight it. The red pill is like you wake up to what's going on and then you become this heroic character who's going to continue to fight the good fight and fight evil. So returning to our media studies scholar, Henry Jenkins, he specifically analyzes the Matrix franchise as an example of what he calls transmedia storytelling. It spans across multiple media platforms, encouraging fans to engage with things like video games, DVD extras, webcomics. Oh my God, guys, remember DVD extras? I love a DVD menu. I gotta just tell you, I've been a big fan of diving back into my DVD collection. I have 2 giant drawers full of DVDs, and I recently bought myself a new DVD player. I'm gonna go ahead and recommend that, guys, go out and buy a DVD player. If you're sick of streaming services and commercials, the formatting might be weird and the quality might be a little low, but the nostalgia factor is great. And you can often find them for like $2 at, bargain bins and things. Or give me a call. I'll loan you anything you want from my collection. Okay, back to QAnon. So Jenkins is talking about how the Matrix sort of invites viewers to be fans, right? You're not just watching the Matrix and going home and never thinking about it again. You're engaging with all of these other media platforms for this transmedia storytelling, right? It becomes a part of your life beyond just watching it on a screen. And I think in a similar way, QAnon invites people to be part of the conspiracy in a very participatory way, right? The conspiracy itself is built on the interpretation of people who are participating. And ultimately, QAnon is just another group that took a piece of art and interpreted it to fit in their worldview, right? This happens all the time. I'm not saying QAnon is unique. There are a myriad of ways that we take pop culture or we take a movie and we apply it to our own life. That's not even a bad thing. It's a very normal human thing. It's actually a very fun thing. But in the example of QAnon and the Matrix, suddenly aspects of the film become not just like Easter eggs for like the director left you a little clue that makes the storytelling more interesting. But instead, QAnon sees parts of the Matrix as like proof that verify a real world conspiracy, right? So in the film, Neo wakes up and realizes robots are feeding off of his body. And that's supposed to signal to QAnon that like people in power are also like feeding off of those who are not in power, right? Sometimes in QAnon, that's literal, like they're literally feeding on the blood of children. And sometimes it's a little more metaphorical, like they're, feeding on our obedience or our money or what have you. And just like how Neo is the savior in the Matrix, Trump is the savior in our world. It's like part metaphor and part literal. I think that's what makes it kind of tricky and honestly quite fun. And it shows the power and flexibility of pop culture and popular fandom, which allow all sorts of people to see themselves as these heroes within this fictional landscape created by, directors like the Wachowskis. good on them for making such a popular film that people to this day just like reference like crazy. I mean, it's a wild cultural touchstone, and we'll probably do a deep dive into The Matrix at some point and really flesh out like all of the metaphors and symbolism if that's something people are interested in. But for now, we're going to now move on to religion and the influence of religion on QAnon. And that's going to include things like mostly evangelical Christianity and a concept called conspirituality. So, one thing I have found fascinating over the years of researching religion and pop culture is how often Christian audiences will find secular media a little more compelling than even, specifically religious media. Stuart Hoover and Curtis Coates did a study where they found that evangelical Christian men were more likely to reference and like identify with characters like Rambo, John Wayne, Superman, William Wallace than characters found in biblical scriptures. And again, this is very human. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it just shows that, it's more understandable and relatable to our contemporary lives to relate to, someone like John Wayne or even something fictional like Superman, because it feels closer to our lives than someone like Job or Noah or David. So it just shows how people are very complicated, and we often gravitate towards stories that bridge the gap between really, 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 really old history or even religious figures to something that's more tangible and understandable in the kind of language and visuals that we understand and move through our day-to-day life today. Like evangelical Christianity and other proselytizing religious groups, QAnon wants to spread the lore of the Q drops. They want to red pill the masses. They want to usher in the storm. They want to conform the U.S. ideally to a sort of white Christian nationalist vision of the Great Awakening. And the Q drops and all of the memes that come out of them show that QAnon, they repeat this very distinct message about whiteness, nationalism, and a certain kind of evangelical Christianity. I mean, that's a really big topic. So I'm sure saying white Christian nationalism like sets off a lot of alarm bells for people. And like, I get it. That's a much bigger topic than what we're going to get into today. So I'll save that for another day because there's just way too much to discuss with QAnon. But what I'm trying to gesture to is QAnon is not just happy with their little belief in the corner. They want more people to know about it. And a lot of what they want to know is rooted in certain interpretations of whiteness, Christianity, and what it means to be like an American patriot. They're very like specific interpretations of those things in a way that it very much mirrors the way that white Christian nationalism interprets those things. But again, we'll dive into that another day. Evangelical Christianity is probably the most prominent religious influence in QAnon. Tons of the Q drops reference Bible verses or gesture toward different Christian beliefs. There's tons of mentions of God and demons and heaven and hell and spiritual warfare and battles. And there's a lot of suspicion about Catholicism. So we definitely know it's not just like a general Christianity. It's specifically Protestantism. And it's definitely a Protestantism that reflects a sort of non-denominational evangelical Christian worldview. And I want to just be really clear about something here. There's nothing wrong with evangelical Christianity. I myself grew up in an evangelical Christian community and household. I still continue to hold my Christian faith very closely and live my life according to those beliefs. And so I'm not here to conflate evangelical Christianity with QAnon. I'm here to talk about how evangelical Christianity is a huge influence on QAnon beliefs, if that makes sense. So they're not interchangeable, and that's not really a helpful way to see all of this stuff. So returning to how, again, evangelical Christianity is a big influence, but there's also allusions to like alternative and new age spirituality that's quite prominent in QAnon as well. There's a lot of intermingling of conservative religion and new age spirituality. And this kind of aligns with what Charlotte Ward and David Voaz have coined conspirituality. And while Michael Barkun talks about how conspiracies are a bit nihilistic, right? Like in general, like a standard conspiracy is often kind of a bummer, right? Like a powerful cabal and it's too big to defeat, and, you know, no one's going to save us, and the government is hiding secrets from us, and the government killed JFK, and like that worldview is like pretty dark, right? But conspirituality kind of injects a little bit of hope, right? So there's these kind of hopeful elements like people are going to be awakened. We're going to usher in a paradigm shift of a great awakening. And actually there is something to hope for. And we have heroes like Trump who's going to save the day. So that's a way that like you can almost see QAnon fusing religion and conspiracy, right? Some researchers have understood QAnon to be like a new religious movement. Again, I mentioned Marc-Andre Argentino does a lot of great work on that. You know, they kind of form their own rituals and community and build upon existing religious beliefs and myths. And ultimately, I kind of align with other scholars like Susanna Crockford and some others that argue that QAnon's religious aspects are basically, it's like best to understand QAnon through like smaller bits. And when you analyze the religious aspects of QAnon, you can see like a larger narrative that QAnon's trying to tell. And it's drawing from spirituality and religion, but it's not necessarily trying to create a religion itself. But, you know, this is an argument that, you know, academics and other folks have been discussing for eons, right? Like, is culture different from religion? Is art different from religion? Is, you know, are conspiracies the same as religion? Are cults the same as religion? Like, religious studies is a very funny field that includes a lot of things and does not always give you perfect answers. That's why I like it so much because I can just sit here and have a conversation about it for hours and you're not necessarily going to have a clear cut answer, mostly because I think the human experience is full of things that are not very clear cut. So returning to this notion of religion and pop culture, right? These are both things that are telling stories or using stories to talk about things that are true, that are scary, that are interesting, that are important. Stories are like, they're the things that move us. They're the things that, you know, get us out of bed and go down the street and go to a movie theater. They're the things that get us to organize our evening around watching a movie or organize our day around listening to a podcast. You know, I don't have to tell you the importance of stories. I'm sure you're thinking of a million reasons why you like them too, right? Same with people's faith. It's another part of what moves us. It gives meaning and shape to the world. When you see the world around you through these kinds of perspectives, things just feel clearer. They feel comforting. That doesn't mean you're always happy all the time, but there's a clarity and a purpose there. So ultimately, when I say that religion and like pop culture both tell stories, I don't mean that they're making things up. The best stories are rooted in truth and vulnerability and real human experiences. I mean that like biblical narratives and movies and conspiracies, they have these few things in common. I would say like 3 big things in common. They often present stories with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's usually obvious like who the heroes and the villains are. And they reveal something about the world or about human nature, right? So not only do those who believe in conspiracies like have a secret hidden knowledge, right? Especially that stigmatized knowledge. But you also have a clear purpose in a world that has been made clear. Clarity is quite comforting. And again, I don't mean that, I think sometimes like comforting is seen as like a negative word. I don't mean that at all. I feel comforted by clarity. Why do you think I went to school for so long? I just needed some clarity. And if everything around you can be very clearly categorized into a clear story, then you start getting into this territory where there's not a lot of room for uncertainty. So there are things that can be a comfort, but it can also like implode when you're facing the inevitable gray areas of life, right? So that was a lot of information I just dumped into your beautiful ears. We're going to move into a little more of an audio-visual experience now. So there's a link in the show notes to my Patreon, and that will lead you to a post where I'm going to talk very specifically about some memes. So if you want to follow along, you can look at these memes visually. I'm going to kind of rapid fire go through some memes that illustrate some of what I just talked about. So to start off, we have QAnon and the Matrix. The first image is Trump's face kind of superimposed on what would have been the character of Neo, played by Keanu Reeves, in The Matrix, right? And all of the bullets that are flying at him that he, stops in midair are now labeled very clearly about, gun control, ignorance, politricks, New World Order, oppressors, propaganda, low vibrations, all kinds of interesting stuff, right? So this is an example of, and I've included in the screenshot, I collected it from Twitter, and someone put as a caption, Trump is breaking the matrix, hashtag QAnon, hashtag MAGA, hashtag WWG1WGA. That's another little tidbit for you. That stands for where we go one, we go all. So if you ever see that phrase, it is very specifically from QAnon. So where we go one, we go all is a phrase uttered in the Ridley Scott film White Squall. It was promptly adopted by QAnon, so you're not really going to see it in reference to the movie as much as you're going to see it in reference to QAnon. So if you ever see that phrase or that hashtag or that series of letters and the number 1, that's pretty much specifically referencing QAnon. So if you scroll down, I included 2 excerpts from Q drops that specifically reference the Matrix, right? So it's one of them is talking about how the Matrix is growing people as crop, and that Q is essentially saying oh, is this real or is this not? This is familiar. It's gesturing to oh, is it a movie? Or are there elites that are actually growing people as crop and using us for energy and controlling our minds, right? As it says, the choice will be yours, I guess, to believe in whether or not that's true, right? The other Q drop, MSM means mainstream media. It's basically noticing how the mainstream media is referencing the red pill and blue pill at the time. Basically anything that you ever see in real life is orchestrated by either the cabal or Trump. That's what these sort of very vague posts are gesturing toward, right? It's oh, did you see what they said on the news? What do you think that's about? What do you think they're trying to signal? How do you think they're trying to control us? That's the tone, right? And you can just see how that would invite people to interpret the world in all kinds of ways, but mostly in a very suspicious, fear-based way that distrusts almost anyone in power, right? So if we keep scrolling, we see Donald Trump offering the viewer a red pill. We also see a Pepe the Frog character offering Neo 2 red pills. So this is a play on, there's a still shot of the character Morpheus offering. That's exactly like the image of when Morpheus offers Neo the red pill or the blue pill, but they've changed it to Pepe the Frog, and they're only offering you red pills in this case. Pepe the Frog is an important character in Donald Trump's rise to power in 2016 and stuck around as a really big figure in QAnon. It's really hard to describe the significance and the whole lore of Pepe the Frog, but I'm once again going to recommend a documentary. It's a film called Feels Good Man. And it's all about this cartoonist who created this character, and then kind of online far-right incel groups took that character as this hedonistic meme to just sort of troll the libs, right? And it morphed into this symbol of Donald Trump running for president in 2016. Essentially, Pepe the Frog is the symbol of a kekistocracy, which I'm going to have to just pause and talk about Pepe the Frog another day, but just trust me when I say Pepe the Frog is like a big figure in QAnon, but has like a larger lore behind it. But this podcast can't be 3 hours. We got to move on. So moving on to the next one, there's a meme that says, "Who is QAnon?" with this painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, kind of with these Matrix-like filters on it, right? The aesthetics looks like the Matrix, and you have hashtag follow the white rabbit in the bottom. All of these are QAnon references. And for this one, I find it interesting because it's like directly linking QAnon with this larger historical patriotic project. And there are memes that reference this crossing the Delaware painting all over the place. There's ones where all of the figures in the boat have been changed to Pepe the Frog, and then Trump is Washington. There's memes where they're all changed to like people in his cabinet. So this is like a very iconic image, and this is a good example of when history and contemporary life are sort of fused together to make both of them seem important in a certain way, right? So that's just a good example how you can use aesthetics from a movie to signal something both about history and your present belief in a conspiracy like QAnon. And the next one is an example of how narrow the worldview is. One of those black and white examples, right? In this meme, it's saying that there's only 4 types of people you're ever going to meet in your life. Can't say that's true. I feel like I've met a lot of wacky characters in my day. But in this perspective, there are people like Morpheus, the people who try to wake up the slaves, the slave masters, the people who have no idea they're slaves, like still trapped in the little, egg sack being fed upon by robots. And then there's the people who like being slaves, which, in the Matrix, this is the character who like betrays the rebel group. So ultimately, the Matrix, these memes show you in action how QAnon takes a movie like The Matrix and uses those really compelling characters and visuals and aesthetics and adopts it as their own. Oh, you like The Matrix? Well, we're just like The Matrix. We're really cool. We dodge bullets. We do coding. We're hackers. We're rebels. We are loyal to each other. We're fighting the man. That's what that's signaling, right? In the same way, there's tons of references to, in QAnon memes, there's tons of references to Rambo and Braveheart and Superman. Like, we're the good guys. We're the brave guys. We're the strong guys. We are out here as very legible heroes. You already know who Superman is. I don't have to explain it. So when I put him in a meme, you already know what that means. If I put Trump in a meme as Neo, you already know what I think about Trump, right? It's just like a shorthand way to express your feelings about the world. And I want to be clear here. I love memes. This is not me bashing memes in any way. It's just showing that as much as we can laugh at them and think they're not important and just think they're dumb and silly, they are also the very foundation of one of the biggest and most influential conspiracies in our contemporary world. And by extension, one of the biggest aspects of this current administration. But we're going to save that for part 2. Moving into my popcorn theory of QAnon. So this was a part of my dissertation where I talk about how QAnon sees the world as a film. And a lot of it is specifically referencing popcorn. There are a few Q drops that say, get your popcorn. You're going to see tons of memes that reference popcorn. I have one here where Jesus is literally telling you to enjoy the show and handing you popcorn. And in this Q drop next to it, it's referencing the film Godfather 3, which has to do with a conspiracy about the Catholic Church, and that it's going to be biblical. So you just see these phrases over and over again. Enjoy the show. It's going to be biblical. Get your popcorn. This epic movie is unfolding before your very eyes. You got to sit back. You got to pay attention. You got to look for the Easter eggs. But you don't really have to go out and do anything. If you notice, the activity of watching a film is mostly sitting and enjoying. And as I said before, there's still the participatory aspects of it. You know, you can go to a fan convention, you can go to online forums, you can explore the DVD menu. But a lot of that is pretty like solo and individual, but it still makes you feel part of something larger. So I've included here some other memes of like Trump interacting with some Pepe the Frog characters as they get ready to watch the show, as in reality itself is a show. In one of them, you can see Trump is the one on the big screen being blown away by what is probably the storm, right? The storm is coming, but Trump is there weathering the storm. He's actually making the storm come to us, and we just get to sit back and watch all the bad people get arrested, right? You see Trump as a little popcorn guy handing out the popcorn. And then I'm included some examples of how movie posters are used as memes. There's this like very intense one that reimagines Lord of the Rings as Lord of the Pedophile Rings, which like just includes all kinds of characters, including like Hillary Clinton as Gollum, or Smeagol or whatever. Sorry, I'm not a Lord of the Rings head. I wish I was. Someone please convert me. And Lady Gaga is in there. You just get all kinds of characters. And it's very clear these people are evil, and you have your little victim in the corner. One thing I will say about QAnon memes, they're not vague. If the Q drops are vague in a way that there's a lot of room for interpretation, the memes are very clear. There is no room to misinterpret what is happening. There's no nuance. It's just very obvious. And that is the general style of these memes, are to be very clear. The style is not to be vague or open to interpretation. So there's another meme here that says enjoy the show, with 5 different posters, you know, referencing 24 and, you know, referencing Game of Thrones, again, as if all of these political moments in our real life are just plots of a movie. And I get it. I remember 2020, we were all talking about how like, oh, I didn't have this on my bingo card for 2020, or, oh, the writers of 2020 are really cooking up something special. You know, people would joke about how the year 2020 is actually just like a script someone wrote. And to make jokes about that, again, is very understandable. But to like literally think you're watching a movie because everything that's happening before your eyes is orchestrated by someone either good or evil, I don't think that's rooted in reality. And B, I ultimately don't think it helps us clarify what's true or to push us toward real action that improves our day-to-day lives. You know, I think when you actually believe you can do something in the world and that you can make an effect, you like get off your couch and go into the world. You don't just sit back and watch things happen. But let's keep going. Then I included a few memes of Trump directly, you know, telling you to enjoy the show. You're going to love this next part. Stay tuned. You'll love the ending of the movie. Trump is just in a million of these, you know, QAnon related memes, and he is also egging you on to watch. And this is going to take us to our discussion about QAnon and meme warfare. These are just a few examples of how these memes are self-referential, right? They're referencing what they're doing, right? Donald Trump is in this poster about meme wars. It looks like Star Wars. And then you see these other Pepe the Frog characters, you know, with weapons or with, I mean, I gotta say, I'm very intrigued by the keyboard as a gun. That, you know, they're fighting the deep state. They're using their keyboard warriors. And it's, you know, it's also very encouraging. We're in this together. We're fighting a big battle. I'm like a lone samurai, but I'm part of like a larger fight, you know, and like, oh, the deep state think that they're really powerful, but actually we're the really big, powerful frogs. But these are just some examples of the kind of idea of meme warfare and what that looks like visually. which is very tied to spiritual warfare. So I included another Q drop here that very specifically, references Christianity. It's a prayer. It talks about, victory against evil. It talks about justice, and it also references using the armor of God. And I found several memes, if you look right below, that talk about putting on the armor of God, right? That's a very specific scriptural reference. And this one was interesting because visually it looks a lot, there's just a lot of memes, if you keep scrolling, that have these sort of violent warfare angel types. They have swords, they have wings, but they're muscular and they're masculine, and they're pretty much always white. Again, I'm sure some people will roll their eyes at me saying that, but I'm just letting you know, looking at the data, there were like only white angels. And not just the wings, obviously, like this guy, not all angels are peaceful. Some were meant for battle. That guy's got black wings, right? But he's still a white body. And it just shows that like warriors are muscular, they're masculine, they're violent, they have weapons, they're ready for battle. And if you scroll down further, you see Trump in these like very bizarre AI images of him kind of like Napoleon on a horse. He's next to this like insanely giant angel warrior figure in all gold. Again, it's like Trump is either literally leading into battle, or he's like the smooth businessman who has, sort of battalion henchmen to do things for him, right? And again, these are from years ago, and I still think that they ring true with how this administration has proceeded now in 2026. If you keep scrolling, you see another sort of like an old school knight character with a sword and a Q, time to strike back. And then next to it, you have this Punisher figure, which the Punisher is, oh, guys, I can't remember if it's Marvel or DC, but it's one of them. Punisher is one of those vigilante characters who like used to be some sort of government ops guy and then just decided to be like a secret violent vigilante guy. And he's not really seen as a hero. He's supposed to be like a kind of complex, but ultimately like not very good person. And you're going to see that Punisher logo all over the place. You're going to see it on cops and soldiers, like in our actual life. It has become this like bizarre symbol of, it's really odd to me that the people who are in charge of upholding the law gravitate toward a symbol of a character who's like outside the law and a vigilante. So I'll just let you do with that what you will. But I put those memes together because it shows how, like, again, in a contemporary vigilante sense and like an old school Knights of the Round Table sense, we're part of this epic battle. It goes beyond time and space, right? And it's also like patriotic, right? You got some American flags in there. And then if you keep scrolling again, we see Donald Trump with laser eyes and a sort of like fighter pilot with an American flag helmet. If you go after me, I'm coming after you. A lot of retribution. Everything is war. Everything is violence. The only way is military. We're not solving anything unless it's with guns and violence and swords and angels, because our enemies are demons and they're evil. And the only way we can defeat them is like maximum violence. And now we're going to kind of look at that next to some softer memes. So we're still talking about spiritual warfare, but I've included a few memes that are kind of coded more feminine and a little bit softer. So you have these memes that are either geared toward or feature women. There's still a lot of strength, but there's a lot more positivity. You get hints of hope, but you also get hints of violence as well. And, I think it shows that there is a place for both men and women in this QAnon worldview, that, you have a lot of like memes about mama bears and mothers like protecting their children. And again, that's great. I hope moms protect their kids. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're not going to see women in the meme warfare and the like physical battles. Like in this one, you kind of see a woman fighting a snake, right? Sort of like an Adam and Eve type thing with the dove. The dove represents the Holy Spirit. But she's still like in a pink dress with her hair down and long and blonde. And it's this sort of idea of like, I will fight, but only within the home kind of notion. And we can have a larger discussion about gender, but I just wanted to show that there are a lot of memes that portray this spiritual warfare, but it's not necessarily all masculine. There's like a softness as well. You get some memes of Trump himself as an angel or in heaven, or I don't know. This could be another one where he's like Jesus. It's a little confusing. Why is he in heaven? He's not dead. And there's another one about God's children are not for sale with a verse from Psalms, with a creepy AI image of Trump and a child. You know, it shows that Trump is protecting the children, but he's like very soft in that protection, right? And even the next one, you have Trump keeping at bay satanic worshipers and human traffickers while holding a little bouquet of flowers to a little girl, right? Saving the children. And it's declaring that Trump is like directly doing this, right? That he is like in the field doing this. And you can argue about whether or not like Trump is like directly stopping human trafficking. I mean, that's a tricky conversation. So I'm just going to pause it for now. You know, it's also important to know that Donald Trump has given immunity or released people from certain prison sentences who like have committed very serious crimes. So it feels really jarring for me to see memes of Trump as a savior. And I think there are plenty of reasons why his supporters understand him to be doing really good things. But I don't think you can deny that like him giving a lot of people immunity, like the Tate brothers, like Andrew Tate, who is a human trafficker, giving them like immunity from prison sentences. Like that's incredibly troubling to me. And it's hard for me to say like, oh yeah, Trump really cares about abused people, you know, women and children and men, anyone who's abused, when he does things like that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I also included this meme of an angel holding a child with a gun. I just found that like so interesting. It's just a fascinating juxtaposition of softness and violence, you know? And you see a lot of that in these sorts of memes. So wrapping up that section, we're moving into Trump as a biblical hero and a pop culture icon. So I found that there were tons of memes that depicted Trump as actual characters from the Bible. As we said, like a lot of folks can relate to both biblical characters and pop culture characters, whether or not you're religious, right? So you see him as Daniel in the lion's den smoking a cigarette while all the lions are like the EU, the CIA, big tech, the mainstream media. Just fascinating. And then we see this other one with Trump as Moses parting the Red Sea. I'm pretty sure this is an image from the film The Ten Commandments, you know, saying, let the storm begin. You see tons of memes that reference like a storm in general. And this is one where you see him specifically as Moses. And then this next collection of memes, the three of them with Trump praying, I bring this up because I'm really fascinated by kind of reality versus wishful thinking. There's not a lot of images of Trump praying. There's specifically no image of Trump praying on his knees like this. That's AI generated, as is the one of him and Melania praying with a candle for some inexplicable reason. But you can see in the next two, they're the same figure of Trump kneeling. And there are tons of this like very specific kneeling image of Trump that was created by AI. And I find it interesting because it's like the concept of the notion of whether or not Trump is truly religious or Christian or believes in the tenets of Christianity is very difficult to parse. I am not God. I do not know the answer to this. But there are just a lot of images where the visuals themselves are not real, right? They're generated by AI, of something that QAnon believes to be true. They believe Trump is praying at home with his wife. They believe Trump is praying in, I don't know, some sort of government building with a light shining down on him. And they believe Trump is praying and like Jesus is present with him. I don't know why Jesus is holding a baby in this image. But yeah, you can see this one is actually like signed by Q. So not only is Trump sort of, there's like a fantasy of Trump as a very religious man or as literal biblical figures. There's also fantasies of him as pop culture figures. I've included a few more down here where you see Trump as not Han Solo, but Don Solo. In the next one, he's Rocky. And another one where he's David and Goliath. So you can see Trump as like kind of a small boy, I think, reading the Bible. And behind him, the shadows show him to actually be David fighting Goliath. And NCWIC, that's nothing can stop what's coming. That's another big QAnon catchphrase. And, you know, he's obviously fighting the deep state, Goliath. So again, these just all show how QAnon views Trump. He's sort of like a paper doll that you can dress up in the cosplay of whatever you want. He's a rebel. He's a strong army guy. He's a boxer. He's an everyday guy from New York. He's just a small boy fighting Goliath. He has lasers for eyes. He has God on his side. There are just all of these different aspects. And next I included a Q drop along with another image of the Last Supper to kind of show some dissonance between QAnon believers, right? This is that example I was talking about before about someone was asking, is JFK Jr. alive? And Q says, no. That was all the way in 2018. Then you look down at this image of the Last Supper, again labeled the best is yet to come. That's another QAnon catchphrase. You have the Liberty Bell. This one is very pro-Russian. There's Putin in there. I don't know why Melania Trump is at the center. This is like a very fascinating one that feels edgy, if you will. This is the kind of meme that, like, I don't think everyone in QAnon would agree with every aspect of this, right? You've got JFK Jr. in the background. You have RFK Jr., a very young RFK Jr., I believe, also in there. You have a bunch of other big figures. You know, again, from several years ago, you can tell that this is a little outdated by some of the other big figures in here that have basically been totally discarded by Trump and his administration. But all that to say, what I'm trying to show is that QAnon is once again flexible. It's all about storytelling. It's all about how you see yourself in the movement, how you see Trump in the movement, and the Q drops could tell you one thing and you still kind of overwhelmingly choose to believe another. So even in the worldview of QAnon, there's not total agreement. This is not like a clear-cut belief system in which everyone is aligned. Which again creates a lot of room for a lot of dissonance and a lot of choose your own adventure in a lot of ways. So to wrap things up with our little rapid fire meme dissection, we're going to look at the heroes and monsters of QAnon. In this section, I mean, we've already seen a lot of depictions of, you know, heroic angels and Trump and these people fighting for the good of the people, the good of the Anons. We have another drop that says these people are pure evil. This is not about politics. You are ready. And then it depicts Democrats very clearly as a demon of sorts who lie, threaten, cheat, kill, and destroy, which is a reference to a Bible verse. Scrolling down, you see a meme labeled, "The real insurrection happened in the early morning hours of November 4th, 2020, not January 6th, 2021, showing Jesus behind Trump and the devil or Satan behind Biden." Another one says, like, if you want Jesus to win, with Jesus boxing with Hillary Clinton, who's wearing devil horns. And then the last one is Barack Obama, I guess, is like possessed by a demon, saying it's not just right versus left, it's good versus evil. And then the other one is Agenda 47 with Donald Trump running away with children as a very scary demonic Hillary Clinton haunts him as he's like running through water. There's some like creepy shadowy figures in the background, some like skeleton looking stuff. These are all images that show how this is not just like, I disagree with your politics. I think you are inherently evil. Not just your ideas are evil, but you are an evil demon. That's a very intense difference from I don't like that policy, or even I think that policy would be really bad for the United States. It's like you are a demon being controlled by the devil himself, and this person is an angel being supported by Christ himself. That's a really intense image. I don't think that I wouldn't advocate for that image in reverse. I don't think Biden is exclusively endorsed by Christ and Trump is endorsed by the devil. Like, I just think that this language is incredibly dehumanizing and overly simplifying. So, guys, I had to divide this podcast episode into 2 parts. I really thought I could get through QAnon in one go, but obviously that's not the case. So I'm going to continue this conversation in part 2, but I still want to leave on a bit of a hopeful note. So we've been talking about conspiracies. That's very much rooted in like skepticism, right? And I think healthy skepticism and a strong criticism and even a little distrust of power is like really important for a healthy society. But a life that revolves around skepticism and fear and distrust is not going to lead to community flourishing or even individual flourishing, right? We have to find ways to balance our skepticism and our criticism with compassion and hope, right? Like, we're in a world full of people. If you just see the world as powers and principalities of angels and demons, you're going to miss the human that's right in front of you, right? If no one can be trusted, how do we build community? If everyone's either a hero or a monster, that's not going to leave a lot of room for grace and human error. I mean, God, I make mistakes all the time. I hope someone doesn't just immediately see me as demonic. This kind of worldview mostly leads to categorizing people as either good or evil. And I don't know about you, but like, that's above my pay grade. I can't go out in the world and go evil, good, good, evil, 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 good, good, good. Like, it's not, I think, what we're being asked to do, and it's not what we're capable of doing. And ultimately, if everyone around you is an enemy, then soon you're going to have no friends. I'm not a perfect hero, but I'm also not a demon. Spoiler alert. And I hope that we can find ways to apply this way of seeing the world, not just to our friends and our family and those we align with, but also to those we don't agree with politically or even religiously, right? The world is full of all kinds of people, and reducing everyone to a character in a meme or a character in a movie or a demon from the Bible, it doesn't get us closer to how things are in the real world. And yes, I believe that there is truth and there is love and there is hate in the world. But to label a whole person as hate and evil is really different than criticizing someone's actions as hateful or evil. Does this make sense? That kind of thinking might make things feel more simple, right? But I think we're made to endure a complex world. If we opt to just simplify things, we may actually never get to the truth, ironically enough. If all elites are evil just because they're secretly demonic lizard people who eat the blood of babies and get off on controlling the world, we're going to lose sight of like other reasons to critique an elite class of billionaires that's like maybe rooted in a little bit more of our shared reality, right? Unfettered greed, the power to circumvent regulations and to just spray a bunch of pesticides everywhere, the ability to influence elections and political power that goes against what the majority of people want, access to monopolize entire industries or secure government contracts, the ability to bulldoze unions and to not pay anyone a fair wage or to use AI instead of hiring people. Like, you get the picture. I don't think something needs to be that scary to be true. Some things are already true and very concerning, right? Like Bezos, Musk, Trump, Clinton, Gates, Thiel, they don't have to be demonic for me to be concerned about their power and their influence. We don't need to tell ourselves scary stories to be convinced of their outsized power and their morally corrupt influence. Like, maybe we should ask ourselves, why does the story need to be scarier than reality already is? Like, what is that impulse that makes us want to beef the story up, right? To punch it up a little bit more. Why are we becoming screenwriters when, reality is hard enough as it is? So anyway, I implore all of us to seek nuance and to be a little more brave. It takes courage to say, hey, just because someone voted for Trump does not make them evil or stupid. Hey, just because someone is queer does not make them a demonic pedophile, right? We don't need to be doing that. We don't need to be playing around in these black and white games that reduce everyone to a little cartoon. We don't want to reduce people. We want to encourage people to be their full selves and to be curious about the full person in front of us. Let them tell the story of who they are. Don't go up to someone and immediately tell a story about them to themselves. I mean, that's not nice for anyone to experience, right? I don't want someone to come up to me and be like, well, I already know who you are. That doesn't really give me a chance to be myself, right? And that kind of cuts off that beautiful moment of curiosity and connection. Sometimes the world does seem like it's full of monsters, but I don't think that means that we have to become monstrous toward one another. And that's going to wrap things up. So if you want to stay up to date as each episode drops, you can subscribe to Apocalypse How on Patreon, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. You can also email me at apocalypsehow@gmail.com. That's how with 2 W's. There's a link in the show notes. With any questions or suggestions you might have. I'm going to have a part 2 about QAnon coming up soon. So there's a little time if you want to give me any suggestions or if I missed anything so far. But for now, as always, stay kind and stay curious.